What is up, YouTube world? It's Chris. I was about to say it's your boy Chris, but a lot of people don't like when I say it's your boy, right? I understand that. So we're gonna keep going. It's Chris, and we're gonna talk about some books today. I'm gonna hit you with two books today, and why they're very interesting to me to wrap up 2025 with. One of these books is like the most profound book in psychology I think I've read so far. And then the last book, stay tuned towards more of the end of the discussion, is going to be a really profound pro-Black knowledge enrichment book. And I'm going to talk about why. I'm just focused on putting out content right now, trying to get these ideas out to you all, trying to, share some of the things I've been reading. I'm always reading. This channel is kind of founded on reading. So without too much fluff, I'm going to talk about the first book, right? This book was really hard for me to get through. And I think I'm maybe a third or close to a half of the way through this book. And it's really hard for me to get through because I'm hitting against so many profound truths that are hard for me to accept, right? I read a lot of difficult, challenging books, especially around my ancestors and our brothers and sisters and some of the stuff that they had to go through, from Malcolm X to Assata to Huey P. and the Black Panthers. And some of those books, when you read them, they're gut-wrenching to hear their stories. But this book is about you. This book talks about your psyche, your mentality, maybe what you're going through. And it's harder because the stories are making you second guess maybe what you think, right? A little bit of the backstory of how I found this book. So I'm in therapy, right? I think, Black men, Black women, if you've come from certain aspects of life or you had a rough upbringing, and maybe if you haven't, but if you notice certain parts of your life where you're ineffective, I do recommend therapy. I think a lot of us don't really, there is a stigma within the Black culture about, going to therapy, about seeking mental help, but I think, in 2025, that stigma is kind of being raised, but being slowly erased. If you go to the gym to improve your body, if you eat healthy, if you go to the doctor for a checkup, why not work on your mind and psyche as well? Why not bring, more consciousness to your psyche as well, to the forefront? So my therapist recommended this book. And from the recommendation, it was hard for me to even grasp, right? When he recommended the book, I was like, I'm not going to read that, I don't even understand that, which is why I needed to read it, So the book is called, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden, right? The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. Basically, he was alluding to the fact, he said, I think you have low self-esteem, right? And I'm like, what? No, I've done this in my career. I've done that. I've been in the military. I've raised these kids. I'm raising men. I'm doing this. But he said, no, give the book a try. Open it up and read it. And, the first part of this book, he defines what self-esteem is and what low self-esteem is. And it's not maybe what you might think it is. I'm on the first 2 pillars. I finished the first pillar. I'm on the second pillar. And I'm going to talk about those today. And how they've kind of affected me in reading this, because I can only piece this book together because I'm taking so much from it. Like, a lot of these pages in there are highlighted. So the first, after he talks and defines about, after he makes the definition of self-esteem, he talks about, the first pillar. And I'm going to talk about the first pillar with you all today and how it's affected me. The first pillar of self-esteem is living more consciously. And this was something I was working on in therapy. But when you read the book and then let that supplement what you're working on, this book goes really deep into it. And living consciously is not just about, living in the moment or doing meditation or something like that. It's like, I'm going to give you my definition of it. Like I said, I want you to pick this up and read this. I'm going to talk more about the dynamics of the book too. But it's about pondering all the aspects of your life and how you can be more conscious within them. Let me give you an example. He tells you to do an exercise where at the end of the day, I think not meditation, but meditation is important, but journaling is important, right? Journaling helps you capture, your life throughout, and it gives you a reference point to look back on. I'm a really big advocate of it, but he has you do these journal stems, right? Where you pick a part of your life and you say, if I could be more conscious, if I could be 5% more conscious in this life, and you write that over and over and over again, but you'll fill the end of that sentence with something different. So let me give you an example. If I could be more conscious in my relationship with insert your lover here, I would blah, blah, blah. If I could be more conscious with insert your child's name here, blah, 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 right? And what happens, you want you to do this over 2 weeks. And, I did it for about a week, and what I've realized is that there are parts in our life that we are not living consciously in, and consciously. Yeah, I'm saying that right. Consciously in. And what I mean by that is like, it's listening to that little voice in your head that's like, hey, you should pay attention to this. Are you living actively or are you living passively, right? Are you just letting your kids, let me give you an example. Are you just letting your kids come home from school and, do their homework, do the basic minimums, but then they sail through their day? You're not really paying attention to what's going on as they're becoming young adults, right? You're not really tuned in to what they're doing, or there's something that you need to address with them, but you're not doing it because it's easier to live passively, right? For some of us, it might be finances, right? I'm really big in finance. I've read tons of financial books, but then when I begin to live passively, I might not pay as a close attention to my finances as I would like. Or is your relationship with your significant other on autopilot? Are y'all just going through the motions? Is the relationship still even working for y'all? Or are y'all just comfortable with each other? And I think that was hard for me to look at because it's like, dang, it'll have you uncover some uncomfortable truths, right? And then even when you realize like, hey, I might not be living consciously, in a lot of parts of my life. And we all spend, let me put it like this. We all are more conscious in some aspects of our lives than others. We're all conscious of, you might be conscious at your job. You might be killing that work, right? But your relationships with your spouse or with your partner or with your children or with your friends is trash, right? You're not living consciously there. And you may not want to put in the work to improve it, right? So I really recommend this book. I'm gonna go talk about the second law real quick. And like I said, stay tuned because we're gonna get into this pro-black book as well. I'm gonna piece this video together and this is gonna be a nice little discussion. And as I move throughout the book and have more revelations, I'm gonna double back to this book. This might be a series, so stay tuned for that. But the second law that I've gotten into this morning was self-acceptance, which is not being an adversary with yourself. And that's hard. That was hard for me, at the big age of, however old I am. I've realized that there are parts of me that were at war with myself. There are parts of me who are maybe not happy with some of the decisions that I've made in the past. And self-acceptance is, not being happy with your decisions, but accepting them, realizing that those are a part of you, realizing that, when you're upset, when you're angry, when you're mad, maybe even when you do something shameful, right? Because nobody's perfect. When you fly off the handle, when you get into an argument, when you are expressing that your needs aren't being met, etc. Those are all parts of you, and you should be accepting of those at every part. If you cannot accept yourself, if you cannot live consciously, these are the pillars. If you can't live consciously, you can't grow, right? Because there are going to be parts of your life, how I look at it, that you're going to be operating through, and you have blinders on, right? You're driving straight, and you're not paying attention to the fact that your back right tire is deflated, right? And you're not getting as much gas mileage, or it's going to leave you on the side of the road. You're driving straight and you know you need to fix that check engine light in your car, right? But you're not doing it, right? Because you rather make Christmas special for your kids, right? I'm just throwing stuff out there. So that's the first pillar. But the second pillar, self-acceptance. If we don't accept ourselves, if we don't accept where we are at, you know, good, bad, ugly, there's no way we can change those things, right? You can't change something you don't believe is happening. You can't say, okay, oh no, I'm living consciously in every area of my life, and realize that you aren't. You know, you can't say that, you know, my relationship with so-and-so might be trash and I'm just leaving it there because I don't feel like dealing with it, whether it be your own extended family or your parents or your, you know. So the second pillar is self-acceptance. I've just got into that pillar this morning, but it's really profound, you know. And so how I'm taking that, one thing that I'm doing is trying to get more into journaling. You know, I do journal quite a lot, but not every night. So I'm trying to recap my day and be more conscious about my feelings. Like, how do I feel about certain things? Why do I need to accept those? Why did I do that? Why did I do whatever I did and get the outcome that I got? You know, dive deeper into that. So, all right, that's enough of this book. It is the 6 pillars of self-esteem, right? Check this out. You might be like, no, I'm not going to read that. This might be for you, you know. And if you do decide to pick it up, come back to this video and leave, or if you have read this, leave some insights, leave some gems in the comments for those. You know, I really appreciate that. All right, enough of that. Now let's transition. So if you're still with me in the video, we are going to talk about one of the most profound pro-Black books that I've read this year. And this book, you know, had me in a clutch. You know, I flew through this book, and it was one of those books that just make you have ideas, and you start stringing multiple ideas together, especially if you built upon some of the other recommendations I've read you, and you have recommended you. And you're starting to gain a solid foundation of knowledge of self. You're starting to gain a solid foundation of who we are as Black people and how we've gotten here, right? This book is called The Black Bourgeoisie, the book that brought the shock of self-revelation to middle-class Blacks in America, by Franklin Frazier. Whoa, you know, this book, read this book. He's gonna say some things in this book that you are not gonna like. He's going to, you know, pose some questions and thought patterns and things like that, that may be uncomfortable for you, for those of you who exhibit Black consciousness in America. But the book is extremely important because he talks about, you know, complex communities, our Black communities. He dissects those. He talks about, you know, how, you know, our rise from slavery, right? And how, you know, there was Blacks that were free before slavery, and how, you know, some of the Black consciousness, I feel like the Black consciousness is fragmented, right? We are not a monolith, of course, right? But you've had Blacks who were free before slavery, who don't have the same mindset as those who were free from being enslaved, you know. You've had he talks about Blacks who own slaves. He talks about different aspects that are really important to get your mind wrapped around. Let me go through this book because unfortunately, you know, I didn't really script this video. This is kind of just more of a discussion, but I want to talk to you about some stuff. He talks about religion in this book and the control of religion and how religion is used within Black culture in different ways. One of the interesting things that he talks about religion, and you might agree or not agree with this, but he says that, you know, even when he talks about certain denominations in the Black community, and I didn't know this, were geared towards different classes of Blacks. You know, he talks about Episcopal churches and Methodists and Baptists and how different Blacks filtered within those churches based on their class, right? He was saying how, you know, a lot of the freed enslaved people, they were more Baptist, you know, even the way they profess their love of God is more jovial, you know, like, you know, the music and everything like that. But one of the things he also mentions here is, he says that, you know, since black people, you know, were shut out of the American economy, you know, when they first got out of slavery, right, when they were first released from bondage, he said that the church was an institution in which, you know, the dominant culture allowed black men to lead in, you know, which was interesting to me, you know, like the pastor. Think about like the pastor and the power that the pastor or the deacon, or, you know, I'm not too, the bishop, you know, I'm not too ensconced in religion in churches, but think about the power that they had, you know, the pride that they had in walking with that. And the church was one of the only places where we were allowed to do that. You know, there wasn't a lot of black men or women running Fortune 500 companies exhibiting power like that back then. He also talks about, and this is, like I said, you might already be not agreeing with what I'm saying, but you got to read the book. He also talks about, you know, how black business, besides the few tycoons that we had, and this is like right outside of slavery, the few tycoons that we had was kind of like a fallacy, right? And I didn't agree with that when I first read this, but he makes a great point on it. I'm like, what do you mean? We had Madam C.J. Walker, we had, you know, all these other tycoons, but really, when you think about it, he was like, you know, most black people, you know, work for white institutions. You know, he was talking about the black dollar, right? And the black dollar is can be a bit of a myth when you look at the amount of income black businesses generate in America compared to